What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you part 1 of my story of Baldur's Gate 2 story series. Couple of things right off the bat. Spoilers, obviously, for the second game, but in this particular instance, also the first game as well, because the second game of Baldur's Gate is a direct continuation of the first game, so there will be spoilers for that. And in fact, I'm going to be spoiling the ending here shortly because that's how the game starts. For my story series, the way I like to do it is basically take you through the main story of the game and occasionally relevant side content. However, typically speaking, just the main story, plot point by plot point. So with that stuff out of the way, let's jump right into it here. Now, as I mentioned, going to be spoiling Baldur's Gate 1 right now, basically. So at the end of that game, you kill your half-brother Sarevok, who, like yourself, is actually a Baal spawn. You are children of the deity, specifically the god of murder, Baal. There is a prophecy surrounding his children, which he made after he foresaw his own death, and these children will basically be responsible for a lot of strife and have the potential to resurrect him. However, we find ourselves in the prison of a mage, because right after the ending of Baldur's Gate 1, we are ambushed outside of Baldur's Gate, the city, by this mage and his associates, and ultimately brought back here where we are experimented on, which we see in the opening scene. Now, shortly after this, it would seem this mage's base is attacked by unknown assailants to us at the moment, but ultimately this opportunity presents the possibility of escape for us. Imowen, our childhood friend basically, who was with us throughout the first game potentially, comes up and frees us out of our cage, and that's where we actually kick off the game from. Now, I've made an entire video literally about this whole dungeon here. Now, this dungeon basically serves as the game's prologue or tutorial, whatever you want to call it. So what we're going to do is cover the things we learn here rather than anything overly specific. For starters, we learn that the mage we were held captive by, his name is actually John Irenicus, and through a variety of sources, we find out that this dude is basically evil to the core. He's doing horrendous experiments on a lot of things in this dungeon. You can find vats filled with just all sorts of creatures in suspended animation in some cases, or in much worse states. 3 dryads he is keeping captive can tell you that their purpose was to attempt to instill him with emotion. However, he seems incapable of emotion, period, these days. We also find out that he was definitely in love with someone at one point. However, for whatever reason, he seems to be unable to do so anymore. On the second floor of this dungeon, we will be met by a potential companion, a guy named Yoshimo, or Yoshimo. I'm not really great with pronunciations, by the way. Yoshimo, again, will offer to come with us and basically help us out with this dungeon and, strength in numbers kind of thing. And then on the second floor, we have the potential to learn a couple of other things. For starters, we can come across a room where Irenicus was actually cloning this woman from his past. However, the clones aren't taking very well at all, and most of them are straight up hostile, as they are well aware that they are not the person that Irenicus is trying to make them into. We can also learn on this floor about the guild war going on, apparently between some sort of assassins as well as a rival group, though we don't know too much about the rival group at this particular juncture. And all of that setup is basically what we can learn before we leave this dungeon even. And then, once we finally make our way to the exit and actually leave, we'll be hit with this narration.
The tunnel slopes upward into the welcome glare of daylight. Such is your relief that you barely notice the debris at your feet, the remnants of a battle fought only moments before. Surveying the carnage, you hear a scream of rage, and a massive explosion collapses the passage behind you. The sounds of combat greet you as you struggle to your feet. The fight, it seems, is still going strong.
Now, once that's over, we will see this sort of scripted event between Irenicus and Imowen, as well as us standing off to the side, where Irenicus is being attacked by the assailants from the dungeon we were just in. He kills a great deal of them, has some back and forth with you and Imowen, where Imowen attacks him with spells. Ultimately, he survives. However, right after this, they are met by a bunch of mages that teleport in and basically try to take Imowen as well as Irenicus in custody. Now, ultimately they're successful because Irenicus, after killing several of these wizards, just allows himself to be taken in. Now, after this happens, one of our potential companions we would have met in the dungeon, who isn't super relevant to the overall plot, while she's definitely an important character, we're not going to be covering all of the companions in this either, so we're going to try to keep the involvement of the companions to main story relevancy as much as we can. But one of our potential companions, Jaheira, will actually suggest that we go to the slums. And if she's not in your party to tell you this, regardless of whether or not she's with you, you will still be met by a man named Lur, I think it is. And this guy will basically tell you that what you just saw was the Cowled Wizards. The Cowled Wizards are sort of like police in the city of Athkatla, which is where you are now, which is south of Baldur's Gate. The Cowled Wizards are like the police because magic in Athkatla is very much so regulated. You're not allowed to use magic here without a license to do so. And if you do, you get arrested and potentially sent to some jail-like facility. Now, in addition to this, Lyra can also explain what was going on with the assailants that were attacking Irenicus. Basically, there is a guild war going on in Athkatla between the Shadow Thieves, as they are known, as well as some other new gang that no one seems to know too much about. Now, once this is over, we are free to explore the promenade, which is where we are now. It has a bunch of shops, and we can kind of get our party kind of geared up a little more if we so choose. However, once we go to leave this area, there is only one available place for us to go, and that is the slums. Now, immediately upon entering the slums, we are going to be met by a man named Galen Bale. Now, this conversation is unavoidable. No matter what you choose to say to this guy, this will play out the same way. And Galen basically explains that he might be able to help you track down your friend Imoen, who was of course arrested with Irenicus. Now, the game lets you frame this however you want. Are you more concerned with Irenicus? Do you want to get your friend back? Do you not care at all? And this guy's forcing the conversation on you anyway. It does kind of let you go in those directions, but at the end of the day, you'll wind up heading back to Galen's safe house, where he'll explain that for a fee of 20,000 gold, he works for an organization that can not only help you track Imoen down, but also help you rescue her. Now, after this conversation, we'll be hit with some more narration.
The deal is made, and you have a goal, albeit a distant one. Your new friend has assured you that passage to Imoen can be bought, though you are certain the final tally will include much more than gold. Any help is welcome, however. And while the cost may be steep, your path is clear. Finding Imoen will lead to Irenicus, and to answers long overdue.
These are the prisoners from the disturbance at Joaquin's Promenade.
What is known?
Not but their names. The mage is John Irenicus. The girl is Imoen.
I didn't do anything. He did it all. I had...
Silence, child. Allow the fool to make his judgment.
Why was this man not gagged? Did he not slay 4 of you?
We dared not approach.
Regardless, in the end, he came willingly.
What should be done with them, sir?
They are deviants. Let them rot in Spellhold.
And that is the end of Chapter 1. So at this point in Chapter 2, really what we're met with is the option to go explore and do side quests for money. Galen there will tell us that we need 20k. What we actually need is 15k. Because once we actually get 15,000 gold, which is essentially the major goal of Chapter 2 of the game, we will be greeted by a messenger, if you will, for the rival guild, because Galen actually works for the Shadow Thieves. And upon acquiring 15k gold, we'll be met by the messenger for the other guild, and they'll basically say that you can meet them at the graveyard at night, and they will offer you a cheaper alternative to Galen's deal. Now at this point, once this conversation happens, you will also be sent a messenger from Galen himself, who will then reduce his price from 20,000 to 15k. I want to mention that the meeting in the graveyard is not exactly time sensitive, but once you go there and have that meeting, you have to pay them right there or that option gets locked off. Chapter 2 ends with you paying either the Shadow Thieves or this rival guild, which we'll talk more about in the next section. But that's the entirety of Chapter 2. It's just getting some money together and paying one of these groups of people, which is very easy to do. Now, the only thing I want to mention as well for this first introductory part for our story series is simply that if it wasn't obvious, the mage Irenicus was experimenting on you specifically because you are a child of Baal. That is important later. Truthfully, the game doesn't tell you much about that, at least right at the start of the game. However, that is very much so the reason you were captured and experimented on, which is why he makes those cryptic remarks about you having untapped power and all that while he's performing his experiments. Now, as to what he wanted, etc., that unfolds over the course of the game, and we'll discuss it at the appropriate time. I just want to make it clear that that is why he abducted and began experimenting on you. So with that out of the way, guys, there is part 1 sorted out. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. I will have more parts up shortly, should have the whole series done within roughly a week. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you part 2 in our story of Baldur's Gate 2. Part 2 here is where the game starts getting a little complicated, and that is to say the end of Chapter 2 to the end of Chapter 3. Things take a few different directions. So I want to mention a couple things right at the start of this video. If you do anything that would cause the main plot to be uncompletable, someone teleports in and kills your main character in one shot, thus giving you a game over. A lot of times, NPCs and things can be killed. However, if you do anything that will break the main plot, you just flat out get game overed by being killed. As I mentioned in the first video, Chapter 2 ends with you siding with one of 2 factions, so these things will change a little bit depending on which faction you side with. It effectively changes a bit of the path through Chapter 3. Before we get into that, I do also want to mention that like the first game, there are dream sequences that can be had while you rest. Specifically, at this point in the game, you can run into 3 of them. Truth be told, they don't do much for the story besides kind of hint at Irenicus and kind of keep you focused on Imoen and John Irenicus because it's easy to get sidetracked doing all the side content to raise gold to advance the main story. These dreams do things like hint at the power of you as a Baal spawn, as well as what's happened to Imoen and her fragile mental state, as the prologue dungeon will kind of hinted at. First things first, let's assume we sided with the Shadow Thieves, which is to say that we gave Galen Bale money. Upon doing so, he'll explain that he is with the Shadow Thieves and that's who is employing you, and you'll get this unique narration.
Allies are expensive in the city of Coin, but you are certain you have made a wise investment. Through Galen Bale, you have purchased the aid of Aaron Linvale, Shadow Master of Athkatla. As ominous as that may sound, you have little other choice. Already you have felt the influence of those working against your search for Irenicus.
The girl they brought in, she's a cute one, isn't she?
I do believe I'll have to practice some enchantment spells on that one.
Hold. What was that sound?
You two, the new prisoner. He's escaped.
What? When? Where is he?
He's in the lower... Gods, no! He comes! He's here! I cannot be caged. I cannot be controlled. Understand this as you die, ever pathetic, ever foolish.
Implantus vulgar imperio.
Hello, little one. You and I have a great deal to do.
What are you planning?
Not to worry. Nothing worse than what I shall do to your friend.
From here, Galen will point you to Aaron Linvale in the Docks District because that person is actually the head of the Shadow Thieves. So you'll go to their guild hall, if you will, in the docks. You'll find Aaron Linvale, who is behind a few trick walls and the like, which Galen will give you a key to. Now, upon meeting Aaron Linvale, he explains that basically he needs your help with a few more tasks, despite you having paid a ton of gold already, but they are working on getting you to Imoen as well as affecting her release. So the first thing Aaron asks you to do is go to the docks district at night, specifically the actual docks area of the docks, and meet up with his contact Mook, who is there guarding some shipments. So you're going to go do that. You will be attacked by the rival guild, who are seemingly magical in nature in some manner, and they will kill Mook no matter what you do here, and then you have to go report back to Aaron, explain that Mook was killed in this attack, and you'll be given a second task. Aaron will tell you that a lot of members of the Shadow Thieves have been deserting or being persuaded to join the rival guild, which is part of the guild war we mentioned in the first video for this series as well. He wants you to go track down 2 of these people at the Five Flagons Inn in the Bridge District. So we can go find them. We can kind of ingratiate ourselves with them. It's possible to go through this without inciting violence, but most of the time this will end in violence, and the defectors will attack you, or you'll attack them. Upon which a recruiter for the rival guild comes in. If you got into a fight, he will be very suspicious, and even if you learned his name through the conversation and use it appropriately, it's Grayson by the way, he'll then attack you if you already killed the other 2. Again, possible to talk your way through this, but it's very difficult. It's honestly easier to just kill all of them. Now, either learning the location from Grayson or reading the note he drops on his body, you'll discover that the rival guild's fortress or base is in the Graveyard District. So we can bring this information all the way back to Aaron Linvale in the docks, and upon bringing this info to him, he will tell us a few things. For starters, if we hadn't pieced it together already, the rival guild is in fact made out of vampires, which explains their magical nature, and a lot of other things we've probably seen around the city. Again, very possible to know this before Aaron tells us about it, but he'll basically tell us that the time has come to strike at their base in the Graveyard District. So he's going to do a few things. He's going to give you a bunch of wooden stakes to permanently kill at least a few of these vampires. He's also going to send a mage and a golem down to their base to open up the doors that are otherwise unmovable without their help. So you're going to go to their base, which is under the Graveyard District. A few of the mausoleums in the graveyard will lead down to the tombs, where you can then make your way to this base. You'll meet with the mage, who's opened the door with his golem, and then you'll get to the business of wiping out the vampire guild. Now, I want to mention that vampires do have a level drain, so if you're going to go through this on anything above story mode, you need to understand the spell Negative Plane Protection, as it is very important here. But our actual goal is actually just to chase the vampire Lasal, the same one who attacked Mook, around this base. He'll lead you into an ambush, he'll then go back upstairs into a bit of a ritual chamber. You'll kill him there, but he's a vampire, so he turns into mist, goes across the map, where we can finally track him down and stake him in his tomb, or his coffin, if you will. Once you stake Lasal, Bodhi shows up. Bodhi is actually the guild leader for the vampires. You might have heard her name before this through a couple of different options, but if you haven't, her name is Bodhi. And she'll explain a few things, honestly. She'll mention that maybe the Shadow Thieves aren't the friends you think they are, and that maybe they know more than they're telling you. But ultimately, she'll fight you. Now, you won't get to kill her. Once she gets low on health, she'll run away. And then we can head back to Aaron Linvale and explain what happened to Aaron. At this point, he'll kind of come clean on his involvement. They know that you were captured by Irenicus, as it's kind of their job to know things like that. But shortly after that happened, Bodhi and her vampire guild showed up. And at this point, members of the Shadow Thieves just started disappearing, never to be seen again. They still don't know where they are. Obviously, they weren't in the guild that we just attacked. The discovery of a body of one of their thieves actually led them to the discovery of Irenicus' dungeon, which led to the attack on that dungeon, which led to our freedom. Now, the only living thing that came out of that dungeon after that scene was us and our companions. So the Shadow Thieves started trailing us and gave us the offer of helping us find Imoen and stuff, who were carted off by the cowled wizards. And Aaron will tell this all kind of through conversation here, but he'll mention that they do plan on helping you now that you've proven that you're clearly not working with Irenicus and Bodhi, now that you've helped them out. They'll inform you that where Imoen was taken is a place called Spellhold, which is a sort of fortress asylum for the magically deviant, as they call it. Basically, it's powerful mages, or just mages in general, that can't control their power, and that he's arranged passage on a ship to help you get there, because it's actually on an island some ways away from the city of Athkatla. So whenever we're ready, we can agree to take this ship.
Awaken, child. It is time for another test.
Oh, please. I can't take this.
Patience, Imogen. Soon it will all end.
No! Don't do this! I don't want to die!
Silence, dog. You have no purpose but to die by my hand.
Incactus pulca imperium.
You are nearly ready for her, Imogen. She will be pleased.
And Aaron will introduce us to Saman Havarian, the captain that will be taking us there. And once this conversation is over, we'll be met with some unique narration that ends Chapter 4, which does change depending on who you sided with. So here is the Shadow Thieves version.
Aaron Linvale has proven trustworthy. You are soon under sail with the flamboyant Saman Havarian at the helm. The journey is uneventful, and if there were other ships on the same course, they must have kept a discreet distance. You make good time, and soon there is a sizable island on the horizon. It might have been considered a pleasant place, but a grim shadow extends the length of it. The asylum, Spellhold, looms from a cliffside.
Now, that brings us back to choosing the Vampire Guild instead, which we now know that it is, in fact, a guild of vampires, which is why their messenger asked us to meet their leader in the Graveyard District upon us obtaining 15,000 gold, which would have ended Chapter 2. So, rewinding all the way back there, instead of talking to Galen, we go talk to the messenger, and we go to the Graveyard District at night. This is where we can meet Bodhi. Now, this is our only opportunity to pay Bodhi. If you choose not to side with her right here, even though it's your first time meeting her, it becomes locked off as an option. So if you want to do this part, you do actually have to pick her side right here.
Allies are expensive in the City of Coin, but you have invested carefully to best serve your interests. Despite her dark nature, Bodhi has promised much, and seems eager to accommodate, though there will assuredly be a price beyond the coins you have given. She is useful for now, so long as she aids in your search for Irenicus.
So if you give her the money instead, she'll basically also set you up with several tasks, also aimed at ending this guild war. First task Bodhi will give you is the exact same task as the Shadow Thieves, but the opposite end of it. Instead of helping Mook, or trying to help Mook, you will go assault the docks and bring back the shipment there. Once you bring it back, Bodhi will explain that the goal isn't to steal their supplies, it's simply to drain resources from the Shadow Thieves. At this point, Bodhi will actually give us the option of a good or unseemly task. This is basically to either rescue or murder someone. We can either rescue an informant that the Shadow Thieves are interrogating, which will of course deny the Shadow Thieves information, or we can choose to help Bodhi murder someone and implicate the Shadow Thieves, causing them all sorts of problems. Either one of these will do for our second task. Once this is done and we come back to Bodhi, she will finally give us the final task, if you will, of assaulting the Shadow Thief Guild Hall in the Docks District. Now, honestly, this is a little more involved than attacking Bodhi and her guild. While you don't have to worry about vampires and level drain, you do have to worry about absolutely tons of traps. You also have to find several keys to get down there. Aaron Linvale is in a secret chamber in the basement of the guild hall, which we would know if we'd already done the other side. This requires several keys. If we side with the Shadow Thieves, we get given these keys. However, now we have to go track them down. So first things first, we have to go kill Galen Bale in the slums and take his key that he would have given us otherwise. This opens the hallway that leads to Aaron Linvale. Once we have this, we can actually head to the Shadow Thieves Guild Hall. We need to make our way to the basement level, which is through a secret door in the wall on the first level. This will lead to the stairs down. Now, once we've got that taken care of, we can find Tizak in a cell just south of where we enter the basement at. If we then kill the executioner in that area, we can get the key to free Tizak, which is actually one of Bodhi's servants. Tizak will explain that While you have the key to open the hallway, you still have to open 2 more doors. One of them involves finding and pressing a button at the end of a bunch of traps, and then the other is opened with a key that Linvale's most trusted advisor has at the end of this dungeon. So we have to wind our way through a bunch of traps, including this big trapped hallway that has the button we need to press to open the initial door, and then we keep following that path until we meet Haas, Linvale's head wizard guy, who on his corpse will have the other key we need to actually access Linvale's room. Once we have all these, we can go fight Aaron Linvale, and upon his death, we'll of course be able to loot everything, but at that point we'll be able to report back to Bodhi. Once we go all the way back and speak to Bodhi, she'll give us a bunch more information, but the opposite side of it. So Bodhi will, for starters, explain that she is actually related to Irenicus. Irenicus is her brother. Sometimes she'll use brother in quotation marks, but they seem related. At any rate, they definitely know each other. Now, Bodhi will also explain that while she will help you go track down Imoen and Irenicus, who are again being held in Spellhold, the fortress asylum outside the city on an island, she needs you to not kill Irenicus here. That basically she has plans for Irenicus that she hasn't been able to act on because he's been pretty much at the height of his power, which even as a vampire she just can't really do anything with. But now that he's been weakened by combat and just being angry, she thinks she'll have a better shot at getting this done. Now, I do also want to mention that she mentions that the Shadow Thieves supposedly paid Irenicus to actually kidnap you, but then that's not how that information is presented anywhere else, so I don't know if that line that she says is a mistake, because it doesn't really seem to make any sense. I guess you could argue that Irenicus captured you at the behest of the Shadow Thieves, and they learned your location or something, which allowed him to do it. But again, that just doesn't really hold up to any scrutiny, so I choose to think this is just a mistake, because all the other information we're given besides this one point is very contrary to this. But she does mention that apparently the Shadow Thieves paid Irenicus to capture you. But regardless, once this is done, Bodhi will offer us a ship to Spellhold as well, at which point she'll take us to meet the same ship captain, which is relevant shortly after this. Again, we will meet Saman Havarian, who will then sail us to Spellhold, which leads us to this unique narration.
Bodhi was as good as her word, and you are quickly under sail, the flamboyant Saman Havarian at the helm. The journey is uneventful, and if there were other ships on the same course, they must have kept a discreet distance. You make good time, and soon there is a sizable island on the horizon. It might have been considered a pleasant place, but a grim shadow extends the length of it. The asylum, Spellhold, looms from a cliffside.
There you go, guys. There is part 2 of our story of Baldur's Gate 2. Just the one chapter, really, technically, but it varied quite a bit, so I wanted to cover all of it in this particular part. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you part 3 of our story series for Baldur's Gate 2. In the last episode, we explored all the various ways in which we could go through Act 3, and basically all of the options that would lead us to Chapter 4 here, which is arriving on the island that holds Spellhold. With no further ado, let's just jump straight into it here. Once we arrive on the island, we're actually in a small town called Brynlaw, that is just outside of the Spellhold fortress. So, something to understand, because it is told to you pretty much right away. Brynlaw is actually a pirate stronghold. They are essentially allowed by the Cowled Wizards to take care of everything outside of Spellhold, which helps keep people away from the island so the Cowled Wizards don't care, and the pirates also benefit from the arrangement. Now, depending on who we came to the island with, the intro will be slightly different. So if you came with the Shadow Thieves, once you step off the boat with Saman Havarian, he will actually betray you and lead you into an ambush of 3 vampires. Now, that's really the only difference in the introduction as far as who you came to the island with. However, that context helps out with some decision-making later, so I wanted to mention it. Now, once we actually get past that, we are instructed to go speak to Sanic at the inn in Brynlaw, who is supposed to have some information that could help us get inside Spellhold. Upon arriving and talking to Sanic, before he can give us this information, he is in fact murdered by an assassin right in front of us, and then that assassin turns on us for being his friends. Now, with the innkeeper, we can actually get some context to this and kind of understand what's going on. Sanic was actually in a relationship with one of the local courtesans. The guild mistress of the courtesans guild in the town didn't appreciate this because Sanic and this courtesan were trying to run away. So in retaliation, the guild mistress had Sanic murdered. So with Sanic not being able to give us the information that we were after anymore, the innkeeper suggests going to the guild either by pretending to be a customer or forcing your way in to find Sanic's lover, Claire. Claire might have known what Sanic would have known. So we can do just that. There are a couple ways to infiltrate the Courtesans Guild, the easiest by paying one of the courtesans outside of the guild. Or you can just go in and start swinging. That will also work, and eventually you'll make your way to the back room of the Courtesans Guild. This is where you'll come across the guild mistress about to murder Claire, so you can stop that from happening, and then get the information you need from Claire. She doesn't know specifically, but she's going to meet a man named Gollin to get her off the island now that Sanic is dead, and she'll take you to him. Gollin will actually have some information for us. He'll tell us that we basically have a couple options to get into Spellhold. That is to either find the single lone Cowled Wizard representative on the island and take his wardstone, which allows him entry into Spellhold, or go seek out the pirate lord of the island, who can either help us get into Spellhold if we play nice, or if we are deemed magically deviant, we can get thrown into Spellhold. Of all of these, the simplest option is simply to go to the Cowled Wizard's house. Pretty much no matter what you say, he attacks you. You can kill him, and then just take his wardstone and then walk to Spellhold. That's probably the easiest thing to do. You can, of course, also go speak to the Pirate Lord. It is possible to just convince him to help you, which is also a fairly easy route if you don't want to fight anything. And I did want to mention before we move on, both of those things can be done without actually rescuing or even talking to Sanic or Claire. You can actually go straight to Desharik or straight to the Cowled Wizard and do it that way if you already know what to do. Some of these steps can be skipped. But when you're ready, you can head over to Spellhold, and you get this cool little cinematic that kind of sets up Spellhold as a building. The cinematic's a little dated, of course, but overall I thought it was pretty cool, so I wanted to mention it. Now, the outside of Spellhold is pretty straightforward. Honestly, we just walk to the door. However, there are several, mists and various ghost-like monsters that will attack us on our way to the door. But once we get inside, we are greeted by the Coordinator. Now, this is one of the times where playing with the sound up will actually help you out, because his voice is very distinct, I'll put it that way. So, the Coordinator will tell us that Imoen is safe, that the people in Spellhold are here because they are a danger to themselves and that they are not actively trying to hurt anyone here, and he offers to basically show you what the Spellhold is actually used for and then take you to Imoen. So you can be aggressive or anything, it kind of plays out the same way. Basically, the Coordinator will walk you through each of the inmates that are in the asylum here and explain how these people are a danger to themselves or just mentally unstable, which is why they're in Spellhold to begin with. Now, if we choose to attack the Coordinator at any point, it just jumps straight to the next part by knocking all of our characters out. And basically, once we get to the end of the Coordinator's little tour, we find Imoen. Imoen is in a rough mental place. She feels empty, like something has been taken from her, but before we can have too much of a conversation about that, the Coordinator reveals his true identity, and that is that the Coordinator is actually John Irenicus, because of course we saw him in the last part through a scripted event escape his bondage, so we kind of sort of already knew what was happening here. I did want to mention, if we have the character Yoshimo with us, this is actually where that particular companion betrays us. He won't offer any immediate explanation here, but we will get into that shortly. Yoshimo will basically explain that on the way to the island, he was actually drugging you the entire time by slipping spell components into everyone's food. Moreover, Irenicus will also explain that this was done through Bodhi, Guildmistress of the Vampires Guild. That's important because last episode we also saw that Saman Havarian was actually also working for Bodhi on the side, and Saman also leads us into an ambush if we come to the island with the Shadow Thieves. I tell you this because if Yoshimo is not present in your party on the way to Spellhold and thus can't actually betray you, Irenicus explains that Saman did it instead in that instance. So basically, you will be rendered unconscious through spells and magical means and taken to a dungeon, and this is where things get pretty interesting overall. Now, we get a ton of information here all at once, so for starters, we are locked up in this little cage thing that we saw Imoen in during flashbacks and the scripted events in between certain events. Now, Irenicus gives us a ton of information all at once. For starters, he was cursed in some manner, a manner in which he required a divine soul to fix. Moreover, that Imoen also has a divine soul, because he will reveal to you that Imoen is actually a child of Baal as well. There's a lot of hints about this, so whether or not that comes as a surprise will vary a little bit, but it turns out that Imoen is also a Baal spawn. Also, that Irenicus was already successful in extracting Imoen's divine soul, and it was given to Bodhi to cure her of her affliction. We're not sure what that affliction is at the moment, it isn't stated. However, Irenicus will explain that they are taking your divine souls to cure them of some curse. And then afterwards, Irenicus will also explain that this is enabled by Bodhi seducing all those members of the Shadow Thieves to join the Vampires Guild and where they were disappearing to. Bodhi was shipping them off to Spellhold for Irenicus to experiment on and basically use their deaths to feed your inner deity, shall we say, because remember, you're the child of the dead god of murder. And basically those deaths would bring out your divine soul and thus allow it to be extracted. And that is what was happening to the Shadow Thieves from the earlier parts of the game. So at this point, Irenicus will take our soul from us, basically. He will request that Bodhi kill us. From here, we're tossed into a bit of a maze, or at least that's where we come to, and Bodhi is speaking to us. She will explain that while Irenicus wants you dead, she prefers to play with her food, basically, and plans to make it entertaining, and will have you run this gauntlet of sorts. Now, this is also where we get Imoen back in our party. Should you so choose, you can actually also send her away still. But the maze here is, or the maze or puzzle, whatever you want to call it, it is as complicated as you want it to be, basically. There's a ton of extra stuff you don't have to do. There's all sorts of puzzles and things down here that you can solve for extra rewards. All kinds of stuff like that. We're just focused on the main story part of it, so that's what we're going to do. In order to get out of the first part here, we need to walk up the stairs nearby into a separate area of the basement, if you will. And in this part of the map, we need to pick up two items. One is the hand of the old master of, like, the asylum, or the architect of it. This guy has been turned into a vampire by Bodhi. You need to kill him, you need to stake him. If you don't have a stake, monsters will actually have one in their inventory nearby. But once this is done, his spirit will thank you for setting him free, basically, and you will be automatically given the hand of this guy, which is one of the things we need. In the opposite part of the dungeon, we can find a group of kobolds who are worshipping a crystal as a god, as kobolds are known to do. Now, they will start talking about their god, Kurtelmak, and how they're trying to bring forth his avatar through this crystal. So we need to stop that from happening. If you're unaware, Kurtelmak is the actual, god of kobolds, the real one, and they're trying to bring forth his avatar. So we put a stop to that, and we are automatically given the focusing crystal that they were trying to do this with. We need to take both of those items back to the room where we were dropped into with Bodhi, walk up a different set of stairs, and bring those two items to this large statuesque head, and presenting both of those items will open its mouth and allow you to go through it. This will bring us to the second part of the gauntlet here. Now, this map, all we need to do technically is gather 2 stone minotaur horns. They're easy to find and they're easy to remember where they are because they are always right near the rooms with the actual minotaurs. But in order to leave this room, we need to find these 2 minotaur horns and put them on a statue minotaur that will then unlock the door forward. Upon reaching the minotaur statue, we will be confronted by Bodhi, who is ready to make her move to actually kill us because she's done watching us run around, basically. However, during this fight, we get some more important information. In the absence of your actual soul at this point, the essence of the god of murder, your father, is trying to take you over, and is basically filling the void left where your soul is gone now. thus turning you into an avatar of the Lord of Murder, the Slayer specifically, which is one of his avatars, which is this crazy looking thing. Now, Bodhi flees the fight once this transformation happens, because she needs to go tell Irenicus about it. Now, this is an important part of the story, obviously, just because of what's happening here. But moreover, in the Slayer form right now, you're going to start attacking your friends, so you might want to plan for that ahead of time, so you don't accidentally kill them or something. From here on out, if you rest, your character will turn into the Slayer for a short time and continue to attack your companions. It will go away, it's not permanent or anything, but until you leave Spellhold, that remains the case. Now, once we leave this floor, we find ourselves in yet another puzzle. So this puzzle is basically just fights and or riddles. If you answer all the riddles correctly after the first couple fights, you can skip most of the fighting. However, there will still be a few. Or you can just brute force your way through here, fight every fight, and ultimately you'll still wind up where you need to go. But basically an apparition is testing you for your sanity and teleports you to various places depending on your answers to the riddles, which will then lead to fights. Answering the riddles correctly will actually net you more experience than if you don't. However, fighting all the fights will give you the opportunity to get experience from the fights, but also allow you to pick up special magic items that you'll find here, which are special in the sense that they're like +2 clubs, that type of stuff, not like literally special. But once you're done with this, you will finally be out of the basement area, and you'll be back in the room, or at least near the room, where Irenicus took your soul. This is where you'll run into Saemon Havarian again. He will explain that fighting Irenicus alone is suicide, so he recommends you head up to the first floor again and release all of the magical deviants that we saw when we came into Spellhold to begin with. This is not a suggestion, though it is framed as one. If you go into the room where Irenicus is, the middle room where he took your soul, it is actually just straight instant death. He'll just kill your entire party outright in one shot. You actually have to go up to the first floor and release the prisoners up there. And once that's done, you'll all teleport into the room with Irenicus, where a fight ensues. Once his health is whittled down far enough, he teleports away, basically explaining that he's gotten what he needs here anyway, and further experimenting isn't going to help him out. He's going to rally his troops and take his revenge, as he puts it. However, at the end of this, we get a chance to speak to Yoshimo again if he was with us. Yoshimo will explain, finally, what the deal is. Yoshimo is under a geas. Basically, this means that if he doesn't follow Irenicus's orders to the letter, the geas will just straight up kill him. A geas is a magical compulsion, basically, and defying it means death. Though typically they require the subject's cooperation to be placed in the first place, which originally Irenicus had as Yoshimo worked for him just on other matters, and then it spiraled out of control, apparently. Now, once all of this resolves itself, and we are forced to kill Yoshimo, to be clear, but you can take his heart that he will drop, and potentially take it to a temple of Ilmater where he can be redeemed, so to speak, at least in death. But once all that resolves, we need to head back up to the first floor, where we will run into Saemon Havarian again. He'll basically explain that at this point there's two ways out. You can come with him and potentially get a ship off the island, or take John Irenicus's portal wherever that goes. Taking the portal drops you directly into Chapter 5. All you need to do that is go get the key out of John Irenicus's office on the first floor, bring it back to the laboratory level right below where he was doing his experiments, open the door to the portal, take the portal, and you're done. However, what you should do, and what most people would tell you to do, is actually take up Saemon Havarian's offer of leaving on his ship, because if you do this, you'll get a whole extra part of the game that you won't see otherwise. Saemon will teleport all of you out of Spellhold and basically instruct you to meet him at the inn when you're ready. So when you're ready, go find him. He'll explain that his ship was unfortunately scuttled because of him helping you. However, he can help you acquire a new one, specifically the Pirate Lord's ship. But in order to do that, you need to go steal a horn from his concubine's house, if you will. So you'll go there, interrupt her cheating on the Pirate Lord with some other guy. But ultimately, you'll get the horn after they call the guards and run off. You'll take that horn to the end of the docks where Saemon is waiting on you. And upon trying to leave with the ship, the Pirate Lord confronts you. There's a fight, but ultimately you're able to win and, of course, leave.
The seas are calm, but the voyage is tense. And Saemon spends much of his time below decks. He acts as though he expects some great tragedy, and that by avoiding you, he can escape its influence. The course he has set is true, though, and you think you will make the mainland in a few days. On the fourth morn, a ship is spotted to the east, and a visibly shaken Tslm orders a change of course. The winds are against him, however, and the other vessel makes steady and remarkable progress towards you. Tslm grows increasingly nervous, and rightfully so. The ship looks odd, and you swear it may not even be resting upon the water. Inevitably, it pulls alongside and reveals a crew like no other. Tslm orders everyone to have weapons at the ready.
Now, after sailing for several days, your ship is attacked by Githyanki. The Githyanki explain that they're after Tslm and Havarian for stealing something that is holy from them. Specifically, a sword that has been mentioned several times up to this point by Tslm himself. The Githyanki, of course, attack. You can fight back. However, this fight is ultimately interrupted by the Sahagan showing up. Sahagan are ocean-dwelling creatures, roughly humanoid fish types, and they will essentially sink the ship. The Githyanki will flee, and Tslm and Havarian will flee. And you are ultimately captured by the Sahagan.
The ship lurches, and the ongoing battle is soon the least of your worries. The entire vessel quickly lists to one side as the cargo below decks violently shifts. There is no chance to make for a lifeboat, and you are thrown overboard, left gasping for air in an undertow you cannot escape. Pressure builds, and you are pulled deep, and you wonder if your last sight will be the disappearing Tslm and Havarian fleeing through some magical means, saving his own skin as always,
and taken to their underground city of caverns. This is literally just a side quest technically. It has a lot of options though. For instance, you can just start killing the Sahagan outright as soon as you come to. You can kill all of the Sahagan here, or you can choose to help them out, because the priestess that wakes you guys up seems to think that you are members of a prophecy that was mentioned by their shark god, apparently. So she'll take you to the king, where a separate priestess will say that there's no way you guys could be those people, and a fight ensues. Now, if you agree to go along with this, you'll be given the side quest. You can refuse, which just leads to the kill all of them option. But if you agree, you'll be given the task of hunting down the rebel Sahagan leader that is in the opposite part of the map. However, you'll have to go get a tooth of their shark god to open the door to get to him. Upon leaving the king's audience, the priestess that rescued you will give you an orb and tell you maybe you should talk to the rebel prince instead, because the king Sahagan is clearly insane. Now, if you choose to help, you'll still need to go get the tooth of the shark god from the city of caverns where they apparently used to live down here, which is protected by a beholder, but once you fight and kill him, you can loot the tooth from the chest that it was guarding, and then pass through the door to the rebel Sahagan chieftain. If you have the priestess's blessing from earlier, you can talk to him, potentially side with him. He'll task you with killing the king Sahagan, or you can kill him. Either or, honestly, doesn't make much of a difference. Something to keep in mind, Sahagan raid the Sword Coast all the time and kill and maim people, so there is no real, correct answer here. Just pick whatever floats your boat. Though, to be clear, what would help the Sahagan is putting the prince in charge. However, again, the Sahagan being in better shape just leads to more attacks on the Sword Coast, so take that for what it's worth. Regardless, once all this is done, either you side with one of the prince or the king, or you kill all of them. The reward for siding with whoever is a magical rope that leads down to the Underdark. If you killed all of them, you just loot the magical rope, take it to where the rebel chieftain is, which is where the hole to the Underdark is, and then you use that. So either way, you'll find your way to this hole, where you can then travel down to the Underdark, which is the beginning of Chapter 5, which is where we're going to leave off for right now. But there you go, guys. There is Part 3 of our story series, which was actually covering Chapter 4. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. We are growing absolutely tremendously. July was easily the biggest month the channel has ever had so far, so honestly, just thank you guys so much. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.
And as you adjust to the dim light, the reality of where you are begins to sink in. It is a realm of countless legends, where evil lurks behind each shadow. And though you have traveled far in pursuit of Irenicus, never have you felt so isolated. As black as your situation may have seemed, it somehow grows darker still.
What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you part 4 of our Story of Baldur's Gate 2 series. And in our previous episode, we had just made our way to the Underdark after learning some big things about the story itself. Now that said, we are still on the trail of course, John Irenicus and his sister Bodhi. Now, before we kick off searching around the Underdark, I want to mention that any time after you left the asylum from the previous chapter, and you rest for the first time, you will be given control over your Slayer transformation that we saw in the previous part. This will allow you to turn into the Slayer as you please. However, each time you do this, you will take a significant hit to your reputation. So, with that out of the way, Chapter 5 can properly kick off. Now, you were just dumped into the Underdark here with no real explanation on what to do or where to go, so you kind of just have to start looking around. And because of that, this chapter can turn into a bit of a much more free-form experience than the rest of the game, honestly. So for starters, you're dropped into essentially the middle of 4 maps. Or 5 maps, really. So there is a map above you, a map below you, a map to the right, and a map to the left of the central map that you are dropped into. To the left, right, and bottom of this map, all of those are various layers of monster types. Should you go clear those out, you can potentially find items that will potentially help you later. However, you don't need them right this second. What we actually have to do to advance the story in any way is find and enter the dark cave on the central map we first land in. Now, if you find the dark cave, you'll notice that immediately you can't actually go into it just yet because there is an impenetrable blackness around it. So obviously we need to find a way past this. While we're exploring, we might just happen upon a gnome settlement or an under-gnome settlement. They have an actual name that is ridiculous and I cannot pronounce it. But we'll find this gnome settlement, and if you proceed politely, you can talk to them, and it kind of acts as a little outpost to do some trading and get some rest. However, you can also attack outright. If you arrive peacefully, they will direct you to their leader. Their leader, if you ask him about 2 people having come this way, Bodhi and Irenicus, he'll explain that they are likely in the Drow settlement nearby, which is the map to the north of us. However, going there would not be an easy thing to do. The leader of this gnome settlement suggests seeking out a creature known as Adalon. He won't tell you exactly what Adalon is, but explains that in order to get to it, you'll need a gem to pass through the dark cave. Now, the leader of this village proposes that you help him out with a situation, and in return, he'll give you the light gem to go speak to Adalon. Alternatively, you can just kill him and take it off of his corpse. However, should you choose to help him, he will direct you to a cave very close nearby, actually, where the gnomes were digging and actually stumbled upon something they wish they hadn't of. And they ask you to go clear it out and then collapse the tunnel where they were digging. So if you go there, you fight the being that's in this tunnel here. It turns out to be a Baldur. If you kill it, collapse the tunnel, and come back, he'll give you the light gem. We can use this to enter the dark cave. Once we do so, we will be greeted by a silver dragon known as Adalon. Adalon is the guardian of this place because where we actually are is where the Drow first descended into the Underdark. And Adalon acted as a sort of peacekeeper between the surface elves and the Drow, who has managed to maintain a relative peace between the two, all things considered. Adalon will go on to explain that recently, John Irenicus stole into her lair and took her eggs, and gave them to the Drow. Adalon has been informed that if she leaves her lair, the Drow will destroy her eggs, thus keeping her at bay, allowing the Drow to enact nefarious plans. Adalon says she knows the way out of the Underdark, but if she's going to help you, she needs to get her eggs back. And at this point, she doesn't expect you to just full-on attack an entire small Drow city. She offers to polymorph you into Drow to help affect your ability to go take the eggs. This is where things get interesting, because in addition to not telling you about this path initially, meaning you have to find all this yourself, the next part also is fairly freeform, because you get polymorphed into Drow. So in order to get into the Drow city, you have to basically play along and try to pretend to be Drow to the best of your ability. However, Drow have very specific societal customs. For instance, it's a matriarchy. Women hold all the power there. They're also a very cruel, inherently evil for the most part, race of people. And if you don't act accordingly, you will be found out and the settlement will turn on you. That is not a game over, because technically all you have to do is go get the eggs. What Eidolon's polymorph allows you to do is potentially use subterfuge to do so. And again, there's actually one more option you might not initially think of because it's a damn dragon, but if you kill Eidolon, you can take a scroll off of her body that will actually open the door that leads out of the Underdark if you know where it is already. So, to sum up, we can either kill Eidolon, take the scroll, agree to her polymorph thing and go try to use subterfuge to get the eggs back, or we can just straight up attack the Drow outpost after we speak to Eidolon. You can't actually get in prior to that. But once you're in the Drow city, if you want to try to do it, you can just try to kill everything in there. And then you'll have to find your way to the temple of Lolth, where they're actually holding Eidolon's eggs. The option that the game tends to push you towards, because combat-wise it's the easiest, honestly, is having you pretend to be Drow. So this is actually also an interesting option, and I'm not going to go over every possibility, but basically you follow the Drow, you perform a bunch of tasks for them and their matron mothers, which is their matriarchs, because they're trying to perform a rite to summon a demon, and they plan on using Eidolon's eggs to affect the deal with the demon. Technically, you only have to follow this to the point at which you can actually go steal Eidolon's eggs, but if you want to, they actually let you take it a little farther and disrupt this entire Drow settlement through subterfuge by ruining the deal with the matron mother and the demon. Though to be fair, just stealing the eggs does prevent the summoning, but you can take it farther than that if you want to, which was a really nice touch. Overall, very cool chapter. However, once you get the eggs back to Eidolon or you kill Eidolon, that's when the chapter is basically over. If you bring the eggs back to Eidolon, she will reward you and then just teleport you straight to the exit of the Underdark. If you kill Eidolon and take her scroll, what you'll need to do is actually head to the leftmost map, which is the Kuatoa layer, if I'm not mistaken, and there is a door that the scroll that Eidolon had will actually open there, which then leads to the surface. But if you get teleported there, you'll have to fight some more Drow, you'll encounter some regular surface elves also fighting the Drow, and they'll direct you to the exit. Once you click the exit, we get hit with this narration.
You have traveled. These last few feet to the surface have seemed the longest trek by far. Your relief at seeing the light of the sky is palpable, even though you are not really fleeing the black of the Underdark, rather the constant treachery. Unfortunately, even though the setting has changed, your immediate future still looks to be far from peaceful. This area has been the staging ground for many recent battles, and judging from the faces of the beleaguered elven soldiers that now approach, there may be more to come.
Once that's over and we reach the surface, we are immediately confronted by several elves who have been fighting off the Drow who have recently attacked them. They will bring you to their leader at the moment, a man named Elhan. Elhan will explain quite a few things, actually. He'll mention that the elves have been pushed out of their own city, actually, or at least the elves out here have, because John Irenicus has attacked the city and sealed it off, thus the elves can't even get into their own city. Upon confirming the fact that you are in fact not John Irenicus's friend through this conversation, Elhan will explain that in order to get into the city, they need to retrieve an artifact called the Rin Lanthorn. This is an ancient lantern that will always guide the way to the elven city, and it will pierce any and all magics that attempt to obscure it. Upon Elhan giving you this information, you mention that the person who probably has this lantern is most likely Bodhi. For whatever reason, we assume that Bodhi went back to her lair in Athkatla, which actually turns out to be legit. That's where she is. So once we have all this information, and regardless of whether or not we want to help Elhan or how polite that conversation went, it's what we need to do to get into Soldansalar, which is the elven city. So at this point, we will travel back to Athkatla. On the way there, you will be hit with an encounter with Drizzt Do'Urden and his party. Drizzt, of course, is a famous Dungeons & Dragons character, and we encounter him here because he can be enlisted to help us with Bodhi if we pick the nice dialogue options. However, you can, of course, attack him outright. He, also like in Baldur's Gate 1, has great items on him which may warrant killing him. So to be clear, you can recruit him to help with Bodhi, which is super helpful. And if you do so, he will meet you at the Graveyard District, where of course her lair is from earlier in the game. Now, once we get back to Athkatla, if we don't want to head straight to the graveyard, we do have a couple other things we can do here. If we sided with the Shadow Thieves all the way back in Chapter 3, we can report back to Aaron Linvale. We can kind of fill in the gaps about what happened, none of which is actually Aaron's fault. He didn't betray you in any way. However, he wants Bodhi, who recently returned to the city, dead because he can't risk her coming back to power, and he will then send some assassins to her hideout to help you finish her off. And while it might not be immediately obvious, if you go to the Order of the Radiant Heart in the Temple District and appeal to the paladins there for help, they will also send help to deal with the vampires below the city, as that's kind of their job. Nothing really points you to that one, you just kind of have to know. Now, whenever we're ready, we can head down to Bodhi's lair in the Graveyard District. I do want to mention, if you sided with the Vampire Guild all the way back in Chapter 3, it doesn't really change anything here. This plays out basically the same way, except it won't be possible to recruit Aaron Linvale's assassins for help here, because of course Aaron Linvale will be dead. Now at this point, we just have to clear out Bodhi's lair, make our way to the basement level where she is. We will fight her with any assembled allies. Bodhi will also give us a little bit more information. That information being that apparently her and John Irenicus were elves in some capacity, that they are attacking that elven city because they feel they were slighted in some way. Bodhi is short on details, but she places a lot of blame on the elves of the city as well. Not information we can do anything with right this second, however, interesting nonetheless. Once Bodhi is defeated, we have to go to her coffin, because again, she is a vampire, and we have to stake her to kill her permanently. This will do two things. It will restore Imoen's soul, because if you remember, back in the last part, our souls were stolen from us. Bodhi had Imoen's soul, so killing Bodhi will restore Imoen's soul to her. Finally, killing Bodhi reveals the Rin Lanthorn in her coffin, which is what we need to take back to Elhan to finish Chapter 6. Now, when we go back to Elhan, who is in the same place as where we left him, he will explain a few things. If you ask him, which the game kind of forces you to, about what Bodhi was talking about with being, outsiders of the elves in some way, he refers to John Irenicus as the exile, and your character can point out that someone that Elhan apparently didn't know is now referred to as the exile. Elhan will refuse to answer any questions, but basically says that it's not his story to tell, and you need to talk to the priestess in Soldansalar to get the full story. At this point, we will be given a free trip to just outside of Soldansalar, where Elhan will use the Rin Lanthorn to reveal the way into the city. Once we go into the city, we're hit with narration.
Guided by the light of the Rin Lanthorn, you pass effortlessly through what had seemed an impenetrable wall of trees. The city that greets you as you emerge is at once inspiring, but also profoundly troubling. For amidst the majestic architecture are dozens of bodies, elves that have fallen while defending their home. Soldansalar is in the grip of Irenicus and his minions, and it will not be relinquished without a fight.
And so begins Chapter 7, the final chapter of the base game. But that is where we're going to leave this part for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you Part 5 of our story of Baldur's Gate 2, and in the previous episode we had just arrived at the elven city of Soldansalar after chasing John Irenicus and his sister Bodhi to this place. Now, while we don't have the full story, we learned last episode as well that John Irenicus as well as Bodhi were apparently elves of some sort prior to this. However, they were exiled for reasons we haven't learned just yet. However, we were instructed to find a priest in the city who might be able to shed some light on that. Like a lot of other chapters in this game, this is as long as you want it to be, really. There is a quick route through the chapter that you can either do or not do. Obviously, we'll be taking you through more of the story-focused stuff, but just keep in mind a lot of this actually can be skipped if you know how. First things first, we were instructed to find the priestess, which is as good a place as any to start. So if we bring up the map, all we have to do is go to Denham's home, which is the priest we were instructed to find. As we travel throughout the city, we are of course going to be attacked by John Irenicus's forces, as they are fighting with the elves in the streets. But once we actually arrive at the priest's home, we can save that priest from 3 Rakshasa, and then we can have a conversation with the priest about the full scope of the situation. So here is where we will learn that Irenicus and Bodhi did very much so used to be elves. Irenicus was actually an elf of some renown. He had basically achieved all the mastery of magic that a mortal can hope to obtain. In terms of being a mage, he was the best of the best, and was obviously a very well-regarded elf. His sister Bodhi, while not as highly regarded, bent his ear quite a bit nonetheless, and she actually encouraged him to seek even more power, which is what Irenicus ultimately wound up doing. He went to the elves' Tree of Life, which is what connects the elves to nature and everything, through their gods the Seldarine, and Irenicus attempted to merge himself with the Tree of Life in an attempt to make himself a god. This plan did not work out. It almost destroyed an untold amount of elves, and for his crimes, he and Bodhi were stripped through divine powers of literally what it means to be an elf. Bodhi sought to find a way around this through undeath and became a vampire. However, even that did not actually solve her problem. And this is why John Irenicus ultimately did all this research into and then finally stole our souls back in Chapter 4. Because our divine soul, as a child of Baal, was able to restore Irenicus to what he was, or at least his power level, if you want to think of it that way. The priestess will go on to explain that we need to find Elesme, which is the queen of the elves, in the palace where John Irenicus took her to. In order to get into the palace, though, we have to do a few things. We can either go the long way around and just skip the main gates, so to speak, or we can do what the priestess asked, which is to call upon the avatar of their god. Now, in order to do this, we have to gather items from around the city and bring them to the Elven Temple, and then place all of those upon the altar there, which is what we are going to do next. Now, luckily, these are easy to find. We are looking for a talisman, a cup, as well as a moonblade. The talisman and the moonblade are literally in the buildings known as the House of the Talisman and the House of the Moon. So pretty straightforward. In addition to this, we actually also need to track down a black dragon that Irenicus also had assaulting the city. So we just head northwest of town, and where the dragon is just a small square map with just enough space to fight this dragon. Now, you don't actually have to fight the dragon. It is possible to trade it at about 30,000 gold if you choose some select dialogue options, and it will also take basically everything you're carrying as well, and then it will give you the cup. You can just take all the items off your character and then give it the gold to kind of circumvent this a little bit and then avoid fighting the dragon altogether, or you can just kill the dragon and take the cup. But once you have all 3 of those items, you need to head to the temple again, place those items on the altar, and then the avatar of Rilifane will be summoned. The avatar will explain that while he can't attack the Tree of Life itself, he can use his power over the spirits and things around to secure the city and open the gates to the palace, allowing you entry. He can't, however, attack John Irenicus directly because Irenicus is using magics that corrupt nature, and he is a nature god. So at this point, the streets become a little safer as the spirits and everything take over. However, you still will find the occasional fight. However, before we go to the palace, we actually still need to go to a place called the House of the Harp, as well as the House of the Horn. So we need to go here, and in each of those buildings, we will find an associated stone harp, as well as a stone horn. We need those to continue. After that, we can head into the palace proper, and upon entry, we will run into a tree. We actually need to interact with this tree until we get several types of nuts from it. These will be used in the next part, and it's easier if you grab them now. Continuing a little forward into the palace, we will come across 2 stone statues. We need to interact with them to give them the appropriate horn or harp, and doing that will open the way to the Tree of Life. Upon entering this map, we will be contacted by Elesme's spirit, if you will, telling you that John Irenicus is draining the Tree of Life and that he is doing this through 3 parasites that are attaching themselves to the tree. So long as that's going on, she is indisposed in a cage in the middle of the map, and she's kind of projecting her image to speak to you. So what we need to do at this point is travel around the tree and kill these parasites. The nuts we picked up earlier will grow branches between the tree and actually allow us to travel around. So we need to track down these parasites. We need to interact with them. Upon the first interaction, they will summon elementals to guard themselves. and once those elementals are dead, you can interact with the parasite again to kill it properly. Once all 3 of them are dead, you will be teleported to the middle of the tree where John Irenicus has Alesmi held. Now that the parasites are dead, Alesmi can sever Irenicus's connection to the tree, thus keeping him from ascending to godhood, which is his goal. Alesmi will basically chastise John for failing to use his years in exiles to learn to become an elf or try to earn his way back into their good graces. And it will be revealed that Alesmi is actually the lover that Irenicus knew at one time. However, due to being stripped of what it means to be an elf, he seemingly lost his ability to remember their love, if you will. Which is especially interesting because even restored, he seems to be incapable of remembering this love. Now, Alesmi will teleport out to go muster the rest of the elven forces, and you will be left to fight John Irenicus. This is a bit of a pain as far as fights go. He likes to cast Time Stop, followed up by Meteor and stuff, so if you have anything that can dispel his magical protection so you can interrupt his casting, that will go a long way for you. Once he's dead, you would think that we would get our soul back just like Imoen did. However, as the text on screen will tell us, we are slowly pulled away from the world following our own soul, because our soul seems to be departing to the afterlife with John Irenicus. And then, next thing we know, we find ourselves in Hell, otherwise known as the Abyss. So it becomes explained to us pretty quickly that we're not sure why it didn't affect Imoen exactly this way. However, the theory is that this didn't happen for Imoen because Bodhi was an undead vampire, and thus there was no other soul in there. Regardless of the situation, it would appear that Irenicus' death caused the soul that he took from you to be sent to the Abyss, and you followed. Now at this point, there is a door just behind us that we can't get through, and interacting with it proves futile. However, as we walk around, we will notice 5 other sub-chambers that we can enter. Entering any of these will basically sum up the situation. Where we actually are is the plane of Ball, that exists in the Abyss. When Irenicus died, our essence of Ball, the thing that actually made us a Ball spawn, in theory would have joined the rest of Ball's essence here on this plane. However, we still have some sway over the place, simply because of how strong our soul is, and the fact that it was untethered from us. So in a weird sense, the realm is basically forcing us and Irenicus to fight it out over who actually controls the soul that we should rightfully claim as ours. But in order to do that, we need to open the door back at the original map. So each of these 5 little sub-chambers has a test of sorts that has usually a couple outcomes, each of which will give us a different reward when we interact with the door later. But our actual goal is to obtain a tier of Ball from each of the 5 little sub-chambers. This is done, again, through passing a little test. We can talk with the Pride Demon in one of them, who will explain that there's a creature nearby that needs to die. You can question this, and actually find a way to talk to the creature to give you the tier of Ball, instead of you killing it for it. There is a room where you will have to pass through doors. Each door demands the costs of one of your companions' lives, or if you don't have any companions with you, just a random peasant. Or you can go through a different route of doors, which will sap power from yourself. There is one where you can be given a sword, and that sword is able to either kill a genie to take the tier of Ball, or you can give the genie the sword, which will also give you the tier of Ball. There is one where you fight Sarevok as he tries to awaken the wrath within you to let you become the Slayer more frequently. Ultimately, all of these are just little tests around the area. They're very small maps. They don't take very long to complete. And once you have all 5 tiers, you need to go back to the door with the eyes in the central map and just interact with the door 5 times to use each tier of Ball. Now, this is going to give you a reward depending on what you did. This can make you immune to +1 weapons. It can give you 200k experience. It can increase your attributes, which sounds pretty cool, but this is literally the last fight of the game, so these are not super useful. Upon opening the door, Irenicus will appear, and you can have a conversation with him about fighting him for your soul. Because while his plans at godhood are failed for the moment, he still sees potential in continuing that path by, actually claiming the rest of your soul, which you are still holding on to, this tiny vestige of it. But either way, in order to get out of here and live, one of you is going to have to die right here. This fight can behave a little oddly, but once it starts, Irenicus will summon a bunch of demons, and then he himself will cast a bunch of protection spells on himself, and then turn into the Slayer. He tends to teleport away immediately, and then there's like a little placeholder slayer that stays here but doesn't actually seem to do or attack anything, and then you kind of have to fight the demons. Again, this fight can just behave very strangely sometimes. But your first goal should be the demons that he summoned. They're actually more of a pain than he is. Once they are dead, you kind of have to walk around the room to find him here and there. He can actually teleport to a couple different spots in the room. However, if you wait it out, his protection spells can actually fall off while you chase him around the room. And this actually makes him much easier to kill, because in the Slayer form, he's not really casting spells at you this time around. It's mostly just those protection spells, and I believe he'll occasionally try to fear you, but that's about it. So if you wait for those protection spells to come off, you can actually just kind of swarm him with summons and things at that point, and then he'll die. Once that happens, we get reawakened in the actual world, where we are talking to Elesme, the queen, who of course thanks us for putting a stop to Irenicus, and they throw a bit of a celebration for you for saving their city. And then we are met with the end of game cinematic here. This is the end of the base game. However, we still have to go through Throne of Baal. Throne of Baal actually discusses the end of the Baal spawn prophecy, which will be the next video and the last part of this series. But with this out of the way, we have covered the entirety of the base game for Baldur's Gate 2, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.
To end like this?
Gorion's sword has become too powerful. We should have acted long before now.
There is no reason to be concerned. The fate of this fool has been sealed.
But can we be so sure?
This spawn of Baal is doomed. There is no escape.
There is no peace for a child of Baal. You've learned this lesson time and again, as all who are close to you suffer because of your tainted blood. When John Irenicus fell, you had hoped for some sort of respite, but peril follows you like pestilence. The time of the prophecy has come. 5 powerful Baal spawn have arisen, leading their armies across the Sword Coast, slaughtering their weaker siblings and innocents alike in a wave of massive destruction. Like wildfire, panic spreads before the armies of the 5, and those suspected of being children of Baal are cast out and revived. Even in Soldanesalar, unease grows into fear at your presence. Queen Elisime urges you to visit a sacred grove where the ancients might shed light on your fate. You wonder what part you will play in the dreaded prophecy, and how long before its culmination devours your soul. seems certain. So long as Baal's throne of blood stands empty, chaos shall reign.
What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you our final part in our story of Baldur's Gate 2 series, and with the last part we actually wrapped up the base game. So this part is all about covering, as you saw in the intro there, the Throne of Baal expansion. Now, this expansion aimed to wrap up the story of the Baal spawn, and it begins by hearing about other Baal spawn taking waves of armies and things and just ravaging the countryside, so to speak. And we, as far as we know, we're still in the elven city that we left until we are urged by the Queen of the Elves to attend a sacred grove of sorts, where the ancients might speak to us about what's to come. And that's where Throne of Baal actually picks up gameplay-wise. All we have to do to initiate this part is simply talk to one of the many stoneheads laying around us. Any of them will do, and that will start the dialogue that carries us forward. Now, they will give you this prophecy here, and this is ultimately just foreshadowing about events to come in this DLC. Now, immediately after this, we are attacked by another Baal spawn. She was sent here specifically to murder us, and she reveals that she herself is also a Baal spawn. Obviously, we have to defend ourselves and kill this woman. If we kill her, her friends that are with her will run off, but upon her death, we will find ourselves transported to a pocket plane. Now, this gets explained very promptly by a Solar who is there to shepherd us through this, if you will. If you're unaware, Solars are like celestial entities in D&D. Now, the Solar goes on to explain that basically it's time for this Baal spawn saga to get itself sorted out. More specifically, she will also explain that we are technically in the Throne of Blood, which is our father, Baal's plane of the abyss. Now, we, because of our divine essence that is from Baal himself, have been granted a certain amount of power over this realm, whether we realize or intend to use it or not. Thus, the creation of this pocket plane that we find ourselves in. The Solar will tell us that basically we're not ready to do what we need to do, and it's her responsibility that she was assigned to by the gods to get you ready. Right after she departs, we are then greeted by the spirit of Sarevok, from all the way back at the very first game. Sarevok, while mocking us as one does, he will explain that we are actually in our father's abyssal realm, that it's not just like a separate plane of hell or something, we are literally in that realm. The essence of your blood made a sort of cocoon, this pocket plane. Sarevok thinks that you did this to protect yourself from the power of the plane, lest it rip you apart because you're not ready for it. Sarevok himself is in fact dead, this is just his spirit here. Because when the Baal spawn die, they all are sent to their father's realm. He saw this cocoon forming and came to check it out in his spirit form and found you. He goes on to explain that if you give him the tiniest bit of your soul, or any divine soul really, that he would be able to restore his flesh. He would not, however, regain his Baal spawn power, if you want to call it that, as his initial death drained him of the taint of his blood, which is what is considered the Baal spawn essence. So all that is gone, but if you give him the tiniest fraction of your soul, he could be brought back to life. If Imoen is with you, that is to say that you finished the base game and then carried her forward into Throne of Baal, she can be convinced to give part of her soul to resurrect Sarevok as well. If we choose to help him out, he will go on to explain a few things. For starters, that this pocket plane exists because we need it to exist, as we kind of figured out earlier. But that said, there are basically challenges in here that will unlock as the expansion progresses, and this is going to challenge us to know ourselves, so to speak, or our lingering doubts about what's to come, that kind of stuff. And in facing those challenges as they crop up, we will kind of be getting ready to face the Throne of Blood. So basically, this pocket plane is going to be full of challenges that we need to clear as they become available to us, which we'll talk more about later. Now, before we carry on with our challenge, we can actually choose to take Sarevok with us as a companion. Moreover, he goes on to explain that he'll even swear an oath to you, which here in this place would be the equivalent of a geas, actually. He would be forced to comply with it. And then you can take him along as a companion throughout the DLC, which I highly recommend you do. There is actually no downside to doing so. You can just hang out with your half-brother, I guess. In addition to the challenges and things to come, there are a couple more things I want to mention here. For starters, the statues near the kind of door to the north can be clicked on, and through those you can actually swap out companions from the base game. So if you had a specific party you were using or anything, or you want to mix it up, you can still do that. In addition, there is an imp butler running around named Kespinar or something like that. Now, what he will do for you is throughout the DLC, you will find unique items and things that are basically components that the imp here can use in combination with paying him, of course, to make you some very strong, unique items. Now, the other thing I want to mention is that Sarevok will also explain where we need to go next, which is the Tethiran city of Saradush. However, before we can leave the pocket plane, we have to take care of the first challenge that we are given. Now, this challenge sees us interacting with a ball spawn who basically turned into a murderer and was ultimately killed for the murders he committed, which he calls retribution. And then you have to fight waves of enemies. And this ball spawn will basically explain that the more you just live your life as a ball spawn, the more death you spread simply by existing. Thus, the more people want to exact retribution on you. But once that's done, we will be granted the ability to leave, which we just click on the door north of it, and then we are deposited into the city I just mentioned earlier. When we arrive, we will find the city under siege. We will also see a woman named Melisande arguing with civilians as well as troops near the citadel of sorts, if you want to call it that, in the city here. Now, ultimately, the forces that are guarding the door will try to attack the peasants trying to get in, and you'll be forced to step in because they saw you and thought you were invaders of some sort as you teleported into a city that is otherwise blocked off by the siege happening outside. So you'll get attacked, be forced to defend yourself, and then you'll have a conversation with Melisande. Melisande will explain quite a few things, that the city is under siege by a man named Yagashura, and moreover that he is after all of the ball spawn that are housed here. Basically, there's several other ball spawn in this city, and that is why it is under siege. The person in control of the forces here, a man named Gromnir, is also a ball spawn and was a general before being brought to this city by Melisande. Gromnir has gone a bit mad, it would seem, and has blocked the castle off in the face of the siege. So Melisande tasked us, if we will, because there's not really any other way to escape, trying to get into the castle to deal with Gromnir. Now at this point we are set loose in the city, where we basically just need to find a way into the citadel to face Gromnir head on. So there are technically two ways to do this, but the easiest way is by far to go to the temple, talk to the priestess there, just be nice about it when you ask her if she knows any way into the palace, and she will then give you a key to the jail very close by to where the temple is. Upon getting this key, whether you just killed her for it or not, you can then head into the jail and then make your way through the small maze, if you will, where you'll fight a bunch of vampires that have taken up residence in this abandoned building. And once you find yourself on the other side, you'll essentially be in the palace's basement. Now, you'll be attacked by a bunch more of Gromnir's forces here, until ultimately you're able to make your way into the actual castle, palace, citadel, whatever you want to call it, where you'll find yourself fighting through even more of Gromnir's troops until you make it up to his little throne room. Here you'll see Gromnir and Melisande arguing. Gromnir is aware of your presence, that you arrived in the city. He thinks you're here to assassinate him, and refuses to believe anything Melisande says. So he has her carted off as you walk into the room, and then a fight ensues immediately because he attacks you, and you're forced to kill Gromnir. This is where Melisande re-enters the room, and explains that with Gromnir dead, and there still not being any way out of the city, you will be forced to deal with Yagashura somehow, as Yagashura is actually a ball spawn as well, and the general of the assaulting army. Melisande will go on to give us more details about Yagashura, as she is apparently familiar with all the ball spawn, as she has been trying to protect the world from the prophecy, according to herself. She'll tell us that Yagashura is a fire giant, but moreover, he seems to be basically immune to all harm for some reason. She's not entirely sure why this is, but she knows he wasn't born this way, that this is something that has been learned or taught or placed upon him in some manner. Melisande is also aware of where Yagashura actually spent his childhood, which is the Forest of Myrrh, and she will go on to explain that traveling there might reveal some sort of information or give us some hint as to what could possibly break Yagashura's seemingly invincibility. Now, at this point, what we need to do is use our acquired pocket plane ability, which will then transport us back to the pocket plane, and then from the pocket plane, we can exit out into basically just outside of the city of Saradush. And then at this point, you will be teleported to the nearby Forest of Myr. Now, you're going to fight a bunch of Yagashura's troops here, but eventually you'll make your way across the map, which is necessary to reach the exit point. And then at that point, you can fast travel to a place called the Temple. At the Temple, we'll actually be confronted by a wraith pretending to be Gorion, who accuses you of all sorts of stuff, but ultimately you'll be able to kill him. As we move forward into the actual temple proper, we'll be confronted by a skeleton cleric that initially thinks we're Baal. However, he realized then that we only are a vessel for Baal's power. And then everything in the temple tries to kill us as well, and we have to fight our way through that. Once we head up the stairs, however, we'll run into a witch named Nayali. Nayali will actually explain quite a few things that are going on here. For starters, Nayali herself used to be a priestess of Baal. Moreover, that she raised Yagashura. She actually stole him from his mother and then brought him here to this temple to be raised. Moreover, Nayali taught her son, if you want to call him that, how to remove his heart and keep it magically safe, which makes him effectively immune to all harm. In order to fix this, Nayali wants you to go to Yagashura's mountain stronghold and gather Yagashura's heart as well as her own heart, because Yagashura stole her heart as well, and she feels betrayed and would like to repay the favor, so to speak. So with this, we can find ourselves fast traveling to the Marching Mountains just north of us. And this is where the lair of Yagashura is. So we're going to fight through a ton of fire giants here. They are everywhere. And then there's actually a bit of a puzzle for us to solve. We'll come across this kind of contraption right in front of a huge set of stairs. The stairs are unpassable because this contraption is preventing passage through some sort of magical field. And we are forced to gather 4 runes from around the fire temple, I guess, for lack of a better word here. And those runes, once acquired, will then shut off the device. So you have to solve just kind of a bit of a walking around puzzle and gathering these runes to then use on this device, which then dispels the barrier on the stairs that then allows us to carry forward. Now, once we are in the inner part of the temple, we'll have to fight even more servants of Yagashura here, which are mostly fire giants. And at this point, we'll be able to find the heart of Yagashura in a brazier. And if we continue one more room past that, we can find the bedroom of Yagashura. And under his bed, we will find Nayali's heart. Because remember, we have to bring both of them back. Now at this point, we can head back to Nayali in the temple at the Forest of Myr. And upon giving her both hearts, she will extinguish Yagashura's heart, which will then make him not immune to harm anymore. But Nayali, upon reobtaining her own heart, will suddenly have a change of heart and try to kill us for trying to kill her son. So we are then forced to fight Nayali and the dryads she summons. At this point, we can head to the siege camp nearby.
As you arrive in the clearing, the first thing that draws your attention is the plume of smoke billowing from nearby Saradush. Its walls have been breached in several places, and its utter devastation shows a city that has been completely sacked by invaders. Bodies of soldiers are everywhere, as is the stench of death. The screams of the innocent attempting to flee can still be heard. Yagashura and his army are nowhere in your immediate sight.
Which is just outside the besieged city, and this is where we can finally confront Yagashura. Upon realizing that he can be physically harmed, he will run off and we will be forced to deal with all of his lackeys around the place before he finally comes back for us to defeat him properly. Now, once Yagashura lies dead, we will be immediately transported back to the pocket plane where the Solar is waiting to speak to us. The Solar will show us visions of our origin. We will get to talk to the spirits of Gorion as well as our mother about how she was a priestess of Baal, and then how Gorion rescued you as well as quite a few other spawn of Baal actually, that were going to be ritually sacrificed to bring back the Lord of Murder. You were spared this as well as Saravok, presumably Imoen, as well as probably a few others, but that said, Baalspawn still did in fact die at this ritual site before all of them were able to escape or be saved. So once this is done, we will come back to, so to speak, in the real world, where we will be having a conversation with Melisande, who will have shown up. She will explain that the city has fallen, all the Baalspawn in there were murdered by Yagashura before we could remove his protections and kill him, so all the Baalspawn that were in that city are dead now. And Melisande will give us some information about Yagashura's allies, the other children of Baal, and supposedly some of the most powerful of them. Now, one of these was Elisera, which is the woman who attacked us in the grove at the very beginning of this video, and two others are Abazagal and Sindai. Melisande says she can point you to where these two people have power at, their enclaves or their fortress, whatever you want to call it, and that in order to attack them, you need to head south to a village in the Callum Desert known as Amkethrin. On our way to Amkethrin, we will be stopped by local forces for the Kingdom of Tethir. They will attack us simply for being Ballspawn. We'll have to defend ourselves, and then we'll be able to carry on to the city of Amkethrin.
Dust blows around you, clearing a moment later to reveal what can only be Amkethrin, a village nestled into an outcropping of rock, amidst a desert so dry and sparse of life that you wonder how such a place could survive. Dominating the village, and seemingly carved out of the stone face of the rocks themselves, is a large and ornate fortress, its purpose unknown.
Here, once we find the monk order that is just to the north of us, we will be able to meet with a man named Balthazar. This is the man Melisande actually instructed us to speak with once we had arrived. So Melisande herself is not here, however she gave Balthazar instructions to basically point out where the enclaves of the two Ballspawn we are tracking down actually are. So this is where we can just start tracking them down. There are a few side quests here and there, kind of just general distractions around town if you want to partake in that kind of thing. However, when we're ready, we need to find either Abazagal's lair or Sindai's enclave. We will have to do both, it just doesn't actually matter which order we do them in. Abazagal, once you arrive at his lair here, you will be confronted by someone called Draconis. Draconis will quickly inform us that he is the son of Abazagal, and he will pretty much attack you no matter what you do. And this will ultimately culminate in him turning into a dragon, because it would appear that this Ballspawn is in fact actually half dragon. So then we can pick up Draconis' head, head into the actual dungeon here, and this is where we can start navigating the dungeon. I want to say this dungeon is the worst. I actually hate this dungeon. You'll get attacked by an initial group of enemies. They're going to drop an empty breath potion flask and a stone to flesh scroll. There are also 4 pools of water around you. Basically, you need to slowly go through each one of these pools. You can only go through one of them right at the beginning, which is the one on the left. This path will lead you to a sort of home in a weird way. It's like the interior of a house almost, with a pool in it. That pool, combined with the empty breath potion flask, will give us a breath potion that will then allow us to traverse some of the other pools, well, specifically one of them, on the right, which will then lead us to a trapped monk. This monk will give us a rope, which combined with the breath potion flask will allow us to take the other 2 pools, one of which leads to a madman named Lycanth, who is in possession of a scroll of reversal that we need to undo the magic guarding Abazagal's lair. Also, you can save a green dragon that is being forced under a geas to protect Abazagal's lair. However, you can kill the dragon, but regardless, you will still need the scroll no matter what you do here. You cannot just kill the dragon and continue. You do actually have to get this scroll to pass the magic ward. And if you have the scroll, you can avoid the fight with the dragon, so it makes sense to just avoid that fight. But once all that's done, we can finally confront Abazagal in his lair. So I do want to mention, in order to get the scroll of reversal from Lycanth, he basically needs the eye stalk of a beholder, and if you have the stone to flesh scroll, you can actually use it on some adventurers who had been turned to stone in the caves here. And this is just kind of like a funny little Easter egg about them being like a party of adventurers, like an actual D&D like group. And when you're fighting them, well, when they attack you, once you meet with them again, after you've sent them on a quest to go get your eye stalk, they will actually attack you, and when that inevitably fails through a scripted event, you don't even get to fight them. And then it shows them reloading, so it's kind of a funny little Easter egg I wanted to mention. But once that's done, we can bring the scroll and everything, and then we're confronting Abazagal. So Abazagal is the very much so high and mighty sorts, thinks because he's half dragon, he's better than everybody, and you're gonna have to fight him, obviously, because he needs to die. However, he's a dragon, so that fight is about as fun as it sounds, but eventually he will die. And just like with Yagashura, we will be pulled into the pocket plane to speak with the Solar yet again. At this point, the Solar will have us speak with the spirit of ourselves from another time. This is interesting because our other self actually explains that while the prophecy that is all about the ball spawn and everything is talking about you, you do in fact bring death and destruction in your wake simply by being a ball spawn, but that's not what the prophecy is about. The prophecy is actually about you stopping the 5. That is to say, the 5 most powerful ball spawn, excluding yourself, which are the ball spawn we've been killing up to this point. Ilisera, Yagashura, and Abazagal. So once this is done, we can then head off to Sindai's Enclave whenever we are ready. And this one is a little different because when we arrive at the Enclave, we're only going to find a lone woodcutter. Now, if we talk to this woodcutter, he'll have no idea what we're talking about as far as ball spawn go, but he'll say that he's seen some strange going-ons around the forest, and when we go to check these things out, we'll be ambushed by creatures every time. If you haven't figured it out or it's not suspicious, you can attack the woodcutter actually to cut this part short, if you can just kind of piece together that this guy isn't who he says he is, or just keep getting ambushed in the woods until it comes out anyway. But the woodcutter, as well as all these animals, are actually drow, protecting a concealed entrance to Sindai's lair, because Sindai is a drow ball spawn. Sindai's Enclave is actually pretty straightforward as far as dungeons go. It's pretty much just a straight shot to her, however, it is a gauntlet of tons of enemies. She will just keep throwing all of her armies at you, basically. Drows, their slaves, her lieutenants, their priestesses, even her Mind Flayer allies. But on our way to Sindai, we will actually see a bit of a cutscene of sorts, where an emissary from Balthazar, which is the monk back at the city of Amkethrin, if you'll remember, is talking to Sindai, basically telling her that she's gonna die. Once we finally make it to Sindai, there is, of course, an inevitable fight, though I do want to mention, on our way to her, we can actually do some really cool things, like we can actually meet the Spectator from the Sahagan city from the base game. If we actually went there, we can even have a conversation with the Spectator about seeing them again, even if you killed them. So there is some kind of fun stuff going on there. However, eventually, you will make your way to Sindai, as I mentioned. Now, when you get there, it'll be just her, because you killed all of her lackeys, but she will have been preparing a ritual while you were making your way to her, and she will summon 7 statues on the platforms around her. These are all her, basically, but with different fighting styles, and they will activate one at a time, and as you kill them, more drow will be summoned in from the steps, so you have to fight the statues and the drows that are being summoned, so kind of have to play that fiddle back and forth, so to speak, as she summons in drow as you kill her statues. But once all the statues are dead, she herself is forced back into the room, where you chase her down and fight her. Now, upon her death, she will show us a vision of sorts, and this is a vision of Balthazar and Melisande fighting. Balthazar will claim that Melisande is no ball spawn, though to be fair, we didn't really have any inkling that she would have been up to this point anyway. After this little vision, we will be forced back into the pocket plane to speak with the Solar yet again, and this is where she will force the spirit of Yagashura to talk to us about what it is the 5 were planning. Yagashura will explain that their plan was that the greatest of them banded together to resurrect Baal to serve him, actually. So all of the 5 were killing other Baal spawn to return their essence back to the Lord of Murder, where they were eventually hoping to resurrect him and then serve as his right hand, so to speak, and be like demigods as he took back his place of power. Moreover, Yagashura will explain that the 5 and yourself are greater than the other Baal spawn because apparently you got more of Baal's essence than the rest of them, and that in killing the 5, you have actually transferred a ton of the essence of Baal back to the Throne of Blood, meaning that Baal is closer to being resurrected than he's ever been. After this, we will be sent back to the actual world, so to speak, and upon exiting Sindai's Enclave, we will be greeted by Elminster, actually. So we haven't really seen him much up to this point, but we did meet him throughout the first game, if we followed along that far. And Elminster will explain that basically he's trying to keep the local governments and things to mind their own business and let this situation between the Baal spawn resolve itself. We can have learned from, of course, Sindai, when she showed us the imagery of Balthazar, from Yagashura, who actually tells us, and then again from Elminster, that Balthazar is actually the last of the 5, which again is the monk that we greeted at the city of Amkethrin. Elminster here will actually tell us to seek out Saemon Havarian in Amkethrin, who should be able to help us with our problem of getting into the monastery, which is magically sealed. After which, Elminster will take off, and we need to travel back to Amkethrin and find Saemon Havarian in the smuggler's cave there. If you don't remember, Saemon was the captain of the ship that took us to Spellhold in the base game, and potentially has betrayed us quite a bit. That said, upon meeting Saemon in the smuggling cavern of Amkethrin, he will offer you basically to just put on guard uniforms, and then he knows all the passwords and stuff to get into the monastery, and if you just follow him, it's a real easy way. If you choose to kill Saemon, there is another way through an undead cave. However, I would just recommend that you follow Saemon Havarian on this one, even if he has betrayed you many times, because he will do just that. He will give you uniforms, let you walk into the monastery with him, and then you'll be greeted by Balthazar's monks. Apparently, Saemon had a deal with these monks that he was going to drug you or something to basically make you incapable of fighting back. However, because of all the stuff going on, Saemon has actually chosen not to do that, of course, so we are free to fight our way into the monastery against what Saemon Havarian was originally intended to do. So we actually had our back on this one. Now, upon entering the monastery, we can have a conversation with Balthazar. He is in fact a ballspawn. However, his motives might not be what you think they are. Balthazar is very much so a righteous person. Even being one of the greatest ballspawn, he was actually dedicating himself to preventing the Lord of Murder's return. So he joined the Five as a way to kill all of the other ballspawn, and then when he was sure he was going to be the last one, he was planning on committing a ritual suicide. But before he dies, he will go on to tell us that he was recruited to be in the Five by none other than Melisande, the seemingly sweet, nice, helpful person we've met throughout this DLC. But upon Balthazar's death, we will be once again transported to the Pocket Plane to speak to the Solar. Now the Solar at this point will actually force Melisande to talk to you, basically, and explain exactly what's happening. So Melisande has actually been the antagonist the entire time. However, she is not a ballspawn. Melisande was actually the highest of high priestesses for Baal while he was actually alive. Melisande explains that in order for Baal's plan to work with all of these children that he made and then being sacrificed to return his essence to the Throne of Blood, in order for this to be successful, Melisande would have had to perform certain rites that would have actually enabled him to return. However, she never did this. She's actually just been guarding that essence basically by herself up to this point, which has given her tremendous power, because all of the essence that should have been going back to the Throne of Blood was actually being hoarded by Melisande per orders of Baal, actually. However, she betrayed Baal and decided to try to raise herself to godhood, despite not actually even being ballspawn. So she created the Five and tried to get all the ballspawn to kill each other. She shepherded all the ballspawn to Saradush, where then the Five could go and kill all of them. And her actual name is Melisande the Black-Hearted. Now, she will go on to explain that with all of the Five dead, and you basically being the only ballspawn left, besides, say, Imoen, that she plans on ascending to godhood, and she's going to the Throne of Blood to absorb all the essence to raise herself to divinity. What you'll have to do is confront the rest of the challenges in the Pocket Plane that I have not mentioned up to this point, but every time you've killed one of these ballspawn up to this point in the story, it will have unlocked another challenge in the Pocket Plane for you to complete. At this point, in order to confront Melisande, you have to complete all of the challenges in the Pocket Plane, which will then allow you to basically dissolve the cocoon that is this Pocket Plane and allow you to enter the Throne of Blood fully and prepared for what's to come. Now, these challenges are mostly just fighting stuff, but they can be a little interesting. For instance, you can come across an aspect of your doubt, which is trying to convince you that doubt is important even for an immortal, because this is the only way that you would actually know, say, where to stop reaching for power as a god. You can choose to accept that or not, and then you'll have to fight it. You can actually speak to the god Cyric in one of these challenges. Cyric is, of course, the god that actually killed Baal during the time of troubles. Now, this is a ton of crazy lore stuff that the Cyric conversation actually tells you. He even mentions Ao, the Overfather or the Overgod, which, if you're unaware, is really cool because Ao is actually he's the Overgod. He's the one that sets the rules all of the other gods have to follow, and is largely responsible for the rules and guidelines and portfolios of all the other gods. Very cool stuff, a little beyond the scope of this video, just wanted to mention that it gets mentioned here. And then the last challenge is actually to fight the Ravager. So the Slayer, which is the avatar we've turned into previously throughout this series actually, is but one manifestation of Baal's power. The purest form, and thus the greatest of Baal's avatars, is actually the Ravager, which is basically like a Slayer on steroids. You have to fight it in order to get to the Throne of Blood by dissolving the cocoon. Now that brings us to the very last part of this, and that is simply to fight Amelisson the Blackhearted. This, compared to every other fight in the game, is a very ambitious thing, because this fight actually has like mechanics and not just spell stuff going on in the background. Amelisson herself is really just a straight fighter. She likes to hit things physically and she'll summon things in. So you'll have to have a way to deal with her summons and then also fight her properly. Once she reaches a certain point of her health, she'll jump back into the big pillar of light, which is supposed to be the essence of all the ball spawn, and start absorbing more of it. Once this happens, she'll connect one of the platforms that are floating around nearby, and in order to prevent this, or kind of interrupt this, we need to go to the pool of essence on the platform that it's currently connected to, and fight the enemies there that she summoned in, and then turn off that pool of essence. We need to do this 3 times until all of the pools are gone, and then we need to finish off Amelisson. Once all of this is done and she reaches a certain point, the Solar will actually intervene and basically force Amelisson to surrender, because she is technically immortal because she's so amped up on divine energy. However, as the Solar actually says, that this energy is stolen, and that while it makes her immortal and gives her great power, she's never going to be able to use it to ascend to godhood, because the gods have decreed that this competition is over, and that you won. The Solar explains that basically something has to be done with all of the Ballspawn essence now that all of the Ballspawn are effectively dead. If Imoen is with you, she will give up her Ballspawn essence just willingly, which the Solar manages to take without killing her, and then that leaves literally only you. You essentially have 2 options, as the Solar explains it. You can give up your essence, which will then be transferred into Amelisson, where the gods will then thoroughly and completely destroy her very soul, and then hide away Baal's essence in Mount Celestia, which is like D&D heaven. The other option is to take all of the essence to yourself and ascend to divinity as the Lord of Murder. Regardless of what you choose, the ending cinematic plays out. The cinematic itself is actually the same, however, the words do change, and then after that you'll be given a wrap-up of whatever companions you had with you. Now before we wrap this up, I do want to mention one thing, and I'm not going to go into it in this video because we're just concerned about what the game was showing us. If you're curious, there is technically a canon ending to this saga, because in 5th edition D&D, Baal, the Lord of Murder, is very much so an active god again. Through external sources outside of the video games, they did actually give a sort of canon ending to this. Personally, not a fan of it, but it does exist. However, I do want to also mention that Wizards of the Coast is on record to saying that the canon of the video games and the canon of the actual D&D, tabletop adventures, so to speak, are, as far as they are concerned, separate canon. Even with there technically being a canon ending, that might not necessarily be the set-in-stone thing you think it is, simply because of that statement that they've previously put out. But with that out of the way, guys, that is it. That is our series on the story of Baldur's Gate 2. I truly, truly hope you enjoyed it. It was a blast to make, and hopefully this will get some people up to speed before Baldur's Gate 3 launches, or just give them the information they're looking for about this older game. So with all that out of the way, truly, thank you guys so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.
Terrible name. Your tyranny shall be renowned, your strength and guile legendary. You are the Ballspawn, Lord of Murder, and the mark you have carved upon the realms shall never fade.